God was and is pure devotee of Krishna. Pure means he has no material, there's nothing material about him. We may see externally, oh, this gentleman is from India, he's from Calcutta, this, whatever you may see, but in fact, he is a pure soul, pure consciousness, and he's totally connected with Krishna. So Prabhupada is Krishna, is a manifestation of Krishna in this material world. So when we see him, when we serve him, we are serving Krishna in a sense directly, and in a sense more than directly. And Krishna is more pleased when we serve his devotee than if we serve him directly. And if we think, and we go to the spiritual world, when we ourselves become pure by this process of serving Krishna's pure devotee and chanting Krishna's name, when we go to the spiritual world, we will be with Prabhupada. We will be with so many devotees. There are millions and millions of devotees in the spiritual world, and we will be the servant of all of them. All of us will be the servant of each other. So we'll please Krishna by pleasing each other. So I have had the good fortune in this lifetime to be associated with Srila Prabhupada in some fashion, as many have. And he was very kind to me, on many occasions. And anyway, so I'm very grateful to be called a servant of Prabhupada. So you wanted me to talk about how this Atlanta temple came to be. Well, it's an interesting story. In my life, I guess I was the person one of the people who brought Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda to Atlanta. And my first introduction to Lord Chaitanya was when I was in college here at Emory, not too far from the temple. And there was an elective course in Hinduism. And I was interested in that. And I had a professor named John Fenton. And he was a Presbyterian minister, had been gotten his ministry training at Princeton University in New Jersey, which is a Presbyterian school. But he was interested in India, and he had been to India, so he was teaching Hinduism. So we studied first the Vedas. We learned Sama, Yajur, Atharva, and Rig Veda. This was superficial, but it was still intriguing. We studied the Vedas, then we studied the Upanishads, then we studied the Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, and Srimad Bhagavatam, and then we studied Lord Chaitanya. And we were taught that Lord Chaitanya was really the only living tradition of the ancient Vedic system today. And that Lord Chaitanya was responsible for stopping the flooding of India with Islam, with the Muslim religion. That Lord Chaitanya revived and revitalized the Vedic knowledge. And so I was intrigued with this, but I was a Shankarite. So I was inducted into the honors program in philosophy. And so I was asked to write an honors paper. So I wrote an honors paper on Shankara. My professor said, you should do Ramanuja. But having been raised as a Christian, I sort of was more inclined to to Shankara. So then I got a copy of Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, and I read it from cover to cover. And by the time I got to the end of the Bhagavad Gita, I had been converted to Vaishnavism by the force of Prabhupada's spiritual energy.
This was the Macmillan Bhagavad Gita?
No, but yeah, the purple one, the small one.
Okay.
This was 1969. So just had not the full unabridged. So, and then I came to know gradually over time that it was correct, what I had been taught. And I'll just say this briefly and I'll get back to the history. So, we call it Vedic culture. That's what we call it in ISKCON. And it's sometimes argued that's a misnomer, but what it really is Dharma. And it's not Hindu Dharma, it's not Muslim Dharma. There's only one Dharma. And this Dharma has existed since time immemorial. It was originally spoken to the sun god Vivishvan, and then Vivishvan instructed Manu, Manu Ikshvaku, and then Krishna instructed to Arjuna. But what happened is Kali Yuga began, as we know, 5,000 years ago, and Krishna, just before he left his planet, he's speaking to his dear friend Uddhava. And he says to Uddhava, I'm about to leave. And so I'm instructing you, and you should also leave, because as soon as I leave, the Kali Yuga will begin. And the Kali Yuga is so bad that it is not fit for a person like you to live in Kali Yuga. You're not going to find any place suitable for a person of your caliber, which is true. So as Kali Yuga began and it progressed, the Vedic culture became, we call it the Vedic culture, the Dharma, Dharmic culture became, you guys, sometimes people say polluted or contaminated, but it became at least watered down. And so, and it spread around the world, this watering down spread around the world. So then we talk about the Roman civilization, Egyptian civilization, the pre-Christian Europe, and then all these other civilizations. But that's really just Dharma. That's just watered down Dharma. And then we have someone like Lord Jesus. So he is attempting to revive this Dharma. Meanwhile, in India, what we know of as Dharma, the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, all the different Puranas and the Upanishads, they became the exclusive property of the Brahmins, the Brahmin class. Only they had this information. And they tended to be under the influence of Lord Buddha, who had his purpose, and Shankar, and they tended to be impersonal, and they became very jealous and possessive of this knowledge, and they didn't give it to other people. So unless you were a Brahmin, you really didn't have much access. And if you were outside of India, you had no access. So the average person, they maybe could hear the stories of Ramayana and Mahabharata, but they didn't really get the message of pure devotional service. The message that Krishna gave to Arjuna, he gave to Uddhava, how to, as a human being, contact the spiritual world by gradual purification and then see and know God personally, because that's the Vedic, it's where once we see and know God, we automatically develop love for him. That happens automatically. And by following this process, you come to that stage of purity. But they weren't teaching that. They were keeping it for themselves. And then gradually, not to offend the Brahminical class, but gradually over time, they began to use this possession of Vedic knowledge to support their own personal interests. So it became locked up and unavailable. So then Lord Chaitanya appeared 500 years ago, and he opened up this storehouse of the most confidential knowledge, of how we can become liberated from this material entanglement, which is causing us so much suffering. And he opened it up, and he did not consider who was qualified and who was not qualified, but he distributed that. And of course, we know that Lord Chaitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. He's the Supreme Consciousness, of which we're all tiny, insignificant parts and parcels. So Prabhupada, when he came to under the order of Bhakti Siddhanta, when he came to the West, he brought that entire potent message of Godhead. I mean, it's not just a message like, how do you get from here to Decatur? It's the message of how do you get from here to your pure spiritual consciousness, where you will find eternal happiness and perfection of existence. And Prabhupada brought that. So what happened to me was, so I had that introduction, Prabhupada, and I had met someone on my travels who had been with Prabhupada in New York, and he got me chanting. So I was chanting. And at the time, my parents were living in California, so I would spend my vacations in California from college, and I met the devotees in California. And they gave me a pamphlet, Join Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan Movement. And it had the Shikshastika on there. And oh my goodness. So I came back here to Atlanta, and then within a week or two, the devotees from New Vrindavan showed up here. I had a little apartment over at Emory, and I approached them and I said, I know who you are. Do you have a place to stay? They said, no. I said, would you be willing to stay at my apartment? And they said, yes, on one condition. What is that? That you let us cook for you. So, oh. So they made nice prasadam. Then a few months later, I went to New Vrindavan for my spring vacation, and became a devotee in New Vrindavan, and came back to finish school. I had a few months left, and then when I was in New Vrindavan, I met Rupanuga, who would happen to be visiting there, and he asked me, would you help us start a temple in Atlanta? And I said, I was planning to move into New Vrindavan, but I said, sure, I'll help it, whatever I can do. So we arranged that when I graduated, he would come back to Atlanta and bring some devotees with him, which he did. And so we had a temple in my apartment over at Emory and then we got a building on 9th Street, and we started a temple. We used to go out chanting every day. We'd leave in the morning, go out on the street chanting, and come back for lunch and go out again in the afternoon. And on the weekends, we would go to the park here, Piedmont Park. We would chant, hand out prasadam to all the people in the park. And then we would travel to Athens regularly to talk to the students. And we traveled to all the colleges in the area. We'd go to Alabama, to South Carolina, wherever we were welcome. Welcome or not welcome, we would go. We would chant, hand out literature, talk to people. And gradually we got a temple on 13th Street. And so at one point, my parents had bought me some stocks, and the stocks paid a dividend. And so they sent me a check. It was for $1,000, which is what it cost to file to run for mayor. And it was a big election. It was when Maynard Jackson was first elected mayor of Atlanta. And before all this, I had been a little bit active in the civil rights movement, and I had marched in various places with a man named Hosea Williams. who Balabhadra knows. He was one of Martin Luther King's right-hand men. So he knew me, and so he endorsed me for mayor. And we had a good time running. And Prabhupada liked that idea of preaching, standing up and saying that, listen, this materialistic civilization has deviated too far from religious principles, and we've forgotten, or we've lost our spirituality. And without the spirituality, then whatever we do won't be successful. We won't be happy. We're missing the purpose of life. The purpose of life is spirituality. It's not material. Everything material evaporates. It all evaporates. The whole thing is going to evaporate. So if we're just trying to find some meaning in something that's going to evaporate, there's no meaning there. The meaning is spirit. So we have to establish a spiritual foundation to society. And we have the message, we have the solution, we have it from Lord Chaitanya. So Prabhupada liked that. And so I ran for mayor, and there's a lot of stories related to that, but that was a fun time. And then after that, a lot of people started coming to the temple. Balabhadra was one of them. And the temple on 13th Street became too small. So there's a lot of details to the story how we got these 3 properties, but we got them. And after we got these properties, Swarup Damodar was here as one of Prabhupada's dear devotees. And he loved Atlanta, and he kept writing to Prabhupada, you have to come here, Prabhupada, you have to come here. See this place, you'll like it, it's very nice. So Prabhupada came. And that was not long after we got these properties, maybe a few months. And so there's so many stories of that visit, but it was a very extraordinary visit. We sat down on the Vyasa-san, he saw the deities. He said that Krishna is very kind. But he says, I will give you all protection, but first of all, you must surrender. And then he said, but Lord Chaitanya, he is more kind. He does not put any condition. He is so kind. And as soon as he said that, he was unable to speak any further. But I was maybe 10, 15 feet from him, and it was extraordinary. It was like seeing someone go have a seizure. I mean, it wasn't fake. It wasn't sentimental. It was, he physically couldn't speak. He tried. You could see he was trying to speak, and he couldn't. And so after a while, it seemed like a long time, maybe it was maybe a minute and a half, and we were just all stunned. And he finally spoke, and he could only get out. It was very forced and a very high voice, like a child's voice. Said, just take shelter of Lord Chaitanya and be happy. Thank you very much. Then he went to his quarters, and Srudakirti later asked him, he said, Prabhupada, you were, it seemed that you were overwhelmed with ecstasy. And Prabhupada said, yes. And they said, so what should we do when that happens? What should we do? And Prabhupada said, I don't do it very often. Means he doesn't show it very often. Prabhupada's eyes were always full with tears. The Lord Chaitanya says, when will my eyes be filled with tears of love flowing constantly while I chant your holy name? So that Prabhupada was. If you look at any of the pictures of him, you'll see his eyes are always full of tears because he's in ecstasy. So, and then we had a play for Prabhupada. Balabhadra was in that play. And it was a Chand Kazi play. Kazi stopped the Sankirtan. And at one point, the Brahmins were saying to the Kazi, if you don't stop this movement, if you don't stop these people, it will spread. It will spread so far we won't be able to stop it. And Prabhupada interjected and said, it is already spread. And he laughed, everyone laughed. And then at one point, the Kazi's men, this is not a good thing. The Kazi's men took the Danga and they broke it on the floor. Well, the clay, and so we did that. We had an old clay Madanga that was already broken. And we didn't know that, Sri Madanga is a person. So Prabhupada looked at me and he pointed, what? And I said, Prabhupada, it's an old one, it's already broken. That materialistic vision I had, and Prabhupada just let it go. But in the car on the way out to the airport, I said, Prabhupada, it looked like that you enjoyed the play. Prabhupada said, yes, very much. He said it was a great success. He said, whatever you do sincerely will be, for Krishna, will be a success. So that was nice. And then we went to Vrindavan for the festival, and some of us from Atlanta were standing in the back of the crowd. It was a huge crowd of devotees. And Prabhupada was talking to the people, the Indians there, and he said, you should go and see our temples in the West. And he said, and you should go to Atlanta. And so when he said that, our ears perked up. He said, you should go to Atlanta. They have 3 buildings, 3 very beautiful buildings. And the center are the deity, there's the temple. On one side is the men, one building, on the other side is the women. Of course, we weren't doing it that way, but that's a good hint of how we could properly use these buildings. And then he said, and they are dancing. You should see how they are dancing. And it's true, because when Prabhupada was here, sometimes we read that, like under Govardhan Hill, there was no hunger, there was no thirst, there was not. And Prabhupada was here for those 2, 3 or 4 days. There was no there was prasadam, but no one was hungry. No, there was no quarreling, and the dancing was effortless. It was, it was as though you didn't have a material body. You didn't need muscles. It was just completely effortless. It was just the natural tendency of the soul to dance and happiness in those circumstances. So that was the result of his presence. He just opened the doors of the spiritual world and invited us all in for which he's doing all the time. But he really did it for those few days. And we were just in Vaikuntha. So that was a great experience. And that he had visited Atlanta one time earlier in the airport on the way to Gainesville. That's another story. But that's basically it.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Balvanta, can you share one pastime of Srila Prabhupada in Atlanta? You shared some, like the drama, Srila Prabhupada going in ecstasy, his conversation with you on the way to the airport, the dancing, and anything else that?
Oh, there's so many. The Sunday feast, was very nice. There were many devotees and lots of guests. The temple room was filled, overflowing. And they all got to ask questions. And the Christians asked some questions. And Prabhupada was very, they were slightly challenging questions. But Prabhupada was very polite and courteous in responding to them. And then there was one devotee, I'm trying to remember his name. I don't remember his name right off, but he would spend half of his time at what they call the 3HO ashram. It was an ashram started by Yogi Bhajan, a man named Yogi Bhajan. And it was sort of a Sikh ashram. And so this man, young man, would come to our temple, and then he would go to the 3HO ashram back and forth, and he couldn't decide what to do, where to commit himself spiritually. So he raised his hand at the question and answer session, and he asked Prabhupada, what happens to the followers of Guru Nanak? So Prabhupada said, the followers of Guru Nanak are indeed fortunate. So of course, Guru Nanak was a Vaishnava, and he apparently met Vishwanath Chakravarti. There's a whole story behind that. So that was for this person. And so that person, he didn't become a devotee. He apparently, I don't know what, he ultimately is just went off. He tried maybe for a while to be in the 3HO ashram. He went anyway. So I thought maybe it was best for him not to be a devotee. Prabhupada answered that way. Then, emboldened by this, there was another man who was a student Emory, and his wife and good friend had become devotees. But he was resistant to becoming a devotee. And over at Emory, where he had been a student, there were a lot of followers of Mayor Baba. I don't know if you've heard of Mayor Baba. He was a person who had some followers. So this person raised his hand and he said, "Who is Mayor Baba?" And he was hoping to get a response like the other one had gotten. And that would then support him in not moving into the temple as he was being pressured to do. So Prabhupada said, "I do not know. There are so many bogus Babas. Just know who is Krishna. That is sufficient." So that person surrendered at that moment. And he's been a devotee ever since. His name is now Parampara Das.
Haribol!
He's a very nice devotee. So,
yes.
So Prabhupada dealt with everyone perfectly according to their position.
Thank you so much.
I think.
Prabhu. Is it okay if we can take some questions now?
Sure.
Also, Prabhuji, tomorrow is the disappearance day of His Holiness Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj.
Is it?
Yeah, you were just talking about him, how he invited Srila Prabhupada to Atlanta.
Yeah, he was such a nice devotee. He was just topmost devotee. He was here. He was working on. He finished his PhD studies at Emory. Preached so nicely to the scientists. Wonderful chanter. Just a wonderful devotee. Prabhupada loved him so much. Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj ki jai.
Yeah.
Good friend, very good friend.
Hare Krishna.
He liked Atlanta. He said it reminded him of Manipur. He liked the magnolia trees. He said that the magnolia trees also grew in Manipur, And the, excuse me, and the Manipuri word for the magnolia tree is the lotus that grows on the land.
Oh, wow. Yes, the flowers are nice, big, and fragrant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj had come last year to Atlanta. Srila Bhakti Charu
Who?
Swami Maharaj. Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj.
Bhakti Charu.
Yes. And he was also, he also liked the magnolia trees very much.
Yeah.
Yes. So dear devotees, please, if you would like to ask any questions to Balvanta Prabhu, please you can unmute yourself and you can ask. But before you ask questions, I would like to ask Balabhadra Prabhu to please, Prabhuji, come on the screen and you can unmute yourself and you can speak few words to Balvanta Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Balvanta Prabhu. Can you hear me? I think Balvanta's on mute now.
Yeah, I think Prabhuji.
Make sure he's unmuted.
Okay. Hare Krishna Balabhadra.
Hare Bol Prabhu.
Oh.
So it would take me years to explain my appreciation for Balvanta Prabhu. And I could tell you hours and hours and hours and hours of not only pastimes, but personal instructions I received from Balvanta. And I just want to share a couple of them. And Balvanta, as temple president, all of us who were fortunate to be in the temple during that time on 13th Street, we were blessed every single day because Balvanta always gave Bhagavatam class. And I just remember all the verses that I learned from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, because we were studying that. And he taught us so nicely. But one thing very unique that we had at the 13th Street Temple, Balvanta, you may not remember, but we had a policy that if you came, because I lived at the Grihastha building, you remember that, right? So you had to get to the temple at 4:30 exactly. And if you didn't make it at 4:30 exactly, Balvanta locked the door. And then
people coming late.
and then he said you have to look in the window. He'd have to see your face looking in the window. All of that in order to get prasadam. Because if you didn't do it, no prasad. And during that time, there were no health food stores and places like that, so you couldn't go out and buy anything. Everything was depending on the temple. And whatever prasadam was there was it. So which leads into another pastime, which I know you don't remember, but it sticks in my heart very deeply. It's about renunciation, humility. And the Sunday feast in Atlanta was amazing. It was just spectacular, the quality of the prasadam. So one Monday after Sunday, we were taking breakfast prasadam. And when Balvanta arrived for breakfast, there was nothing left except some sweet rice that had been left out overnight, and it became, coagulated or kind of like gel together, maybe a little spoiled. And that's all that was left. And Balvanta, as he was talking to us, walked over, took that sweet rice, put it on his plate, still talking, sat down and started eating. We were all looking at him like, what? It was just so humble how he treated us and trained us. I know when I first joined the temple, and I was previously married, my ex-wife, and you remember Gloria, my son's mother. So I was coming to the temple every day because I worked on 14th Street. The temple's on 13th Street. I worked at Colony Square. So I would come to the temple every single day, and I was chanting 16 rounds and doing service. I worked at Spiritual Sky with Jayasena, selling incense. So Balvanta called me to the office. He said, Bhakta Ben, you come into the temple every day. You come every Sunday. You're doing service. Why don't you just join? And I looked at him like, what? I never thought I'd have to join. He said, you're already surrendered. So I said, but what about my wife? He said, if she loves you, she'll also join. So we all came together. That was October 1973.
I remember her, yeah.
Yeah, so Balvanta is just so many things. Like I had a major problem with eating too much prasadam on Sunday. So I was in total anxiety. So I went to Balvanta and said, Balvanta, I don't know what to do. I'm eating too much and this. And Balvanta looked at me and said, eat what you like, but don't eat too much. Just little simple instructions on and on and on. And I can tell you so many. Like when I started Sankirtan, at the airport in 1975. So I went to Balvanta and said, Prabhu, I want to be trained up from Tripurari and all the big Sankirtan devotees how to do Sankirtan. Balvanta looked at me and said, just go and preach. Don't worry about all the fans. Just go and preach. So I'm indebted to Balvanta. And the last thing I want to share is a pastime we had together in Delhi in 1976. When Prabhupada was on the stage that night. During the daytime, the entire shamiyan, the entire tent, everything blew down. There was a big windstorm in Delhi. Everything just blew down. So then we had a nice kirtan, and then Prabhupada came that night to give the program. And I was so blessed that night, Balvanta Prabhu, because, and I have a picture to prove it. So Balvanta allowed me to come on the stage with Srila Prabhupada, and he gave me the garland that he was going to give to Prabhupada so I could put it on Srila Prabhupada. And I was allowed to sit there for the entire lecture next to Balvanta with Srila Prabhupada. And for that, Prabhu, I am eternally indebted. And you and Mother Balavi are, you are my spiritual transcendental protectors for all these years. And I, whatever I can do to serve you and serve the community, I commit myself to that. Thank you, Balvanta Prabhu, a million times over. Hare Krishna.
Balabhadra, we'll be together eternally in the spiritual world.
Thank you, Prabhu.
In the spiritual world, there are many villages. They're really not villages, they're pleasure groves.
Mm.
They're pleasure groves where this divine couple, Radha and Krishna, and their associates, they come to these groves to enjoy. And
Wow.
these groves are divided. I mean, they're next to each other, many groves, and then there's like bigger and bigger organizations. So all of us, all of our friends, we all together, and we prepare these groves for Radha and Krishna to come.
Mm.
And Lord Chaitanya and his associates, they come and they chant for Radha and Krishna. So the big nation of groves is Prabhupada. Is in charge of that. And within that, there's smaller groves. And you and I will be.
New Paniati
If we're
Grove.
not in the same grove, we'll at least be next door neighbors.
And one last thing, devotees don't realize that Balvanta is actually the founder of the Murari band. It was his vision. He called me in the office again. So Balabhadra, you wrote down on your application that you play music. I think we should start one band. So myself and Mother Nardi, we came together under your guidance and working with you, we produced that first album at Murari.
That's great music. All Krishna-centered.
Yeah, so it was your vision and we carried through with that. Even to this day, Murari band is still together because of you.
Not because of me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Balabhadra. Very kind to say these things.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Balabhadra Prabhu.
Haribo Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. So, dear devotees, would anyone else like to ask any questions to Balvanta Prabhu, our first temple president of ISKCON Atlanta?
If not, let me say, can I say a few words from the Bhagavad Gita? I mean,
Yes, please.
I feel, I don't feel qualified, but because I know you, especially persons who were born in India, are already Krishna conscious by nature. Prabhupada said that. It's part of your inner self is naturally Krishna conscious. But I'd like to say a few words of some things that I've learned from Prabhupada, and I've been blessed by him, not because of being qualified, but just because of his mercy. And there's a number of ways to reach transcendence. One is by gradual process over a long period of time. And another is by strictly following the regular principles as set down in the scriptures. Another is just by receiving the mercy of Krishna through his devotee. And I've received some mercy just by being in the right place at the right time. So let me just get, if I can share a little bit of that about this process of devotional service and what it, how it's accomplished and what it means. It has a very deep inner meaning, inner significance. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I control heat, rain, and the drought. I am immortality and I am death personified. Both being and non-being are in me. So just imagine this person. I mean, this is a person who he's Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam, that he's the one who is supporting the many, and the many is inconceivable to us. And they're more living beings than there are molecules of air on this planet. And this is just one planet. There are innumerable universes. And when he breathes out, these universes expand, come into existence and expand, and then he breathes back in and they come back into his body. And this is one lifetime of Brahma. So our lifetime is so tiny and insignificant, but we are, so this is the person that we are trying to connect with. And in the material world, in this material world, if we want to be friends with someone, if we want to have a relationship with someone, it takes time. You know, Balabhadra and I have known each other for many, many years. We have a relationship, and so you can't just have a relationship with someone that you see on the street. You have to connect with them. You have to introduce yourself to them. You have to exchange with them. You have to have them serve you. You serve them. You ask them who they are, where they have come from, what they've done in their lives, what's their profession, what's their family. And then you get to know them and gradually have a relationship. Well, how much more so is it with the Supreme Person? So our purpose, according to every scripture in the world, is to develop love of God. But how do you love someone that you don't know? How do you, Jesus told his disciples, how can you say you love God who you have not seen, and you do not love each other who you have seen? So how do you love someone that you don't know? So we have to come to know Krishna. And then once we know Krishna, our love for him is automatic. Just like you don't have to be taught to like a beautiful scenery. A young boy, young girl don't have to be taught how to be attracted to each other. You don't have to teach that. It happens automatically. So Krishna is like that. When we know him, we will automatically love him because he is more brilliant than millions of suns, but he's not hot. If you get into the hot sun, it's oppressive. Krishna is brilliant, more brilliant, but it's not oppressive. It's cool like the moon. He's cool like the moon and brilliant like the sun. And he's peaceful. He's millions of times more peaceful than a beautiful forest path. And he's millions of times more beautiful than the most beautiful scene that you can imagine. Tropical isle with palm trees and beautiful clear crystal water. Millions and millions of times more beautiful than that. And happiness, if you can take the most happy moment you've had in your life, you have to multiply that hundreds of millions of times to compare to the happiness that this the individual spark of consciousness feels in the presence of the Supreme Consciousness. So we all want that. We have a deep existential craving, every one of us, whether it's devotees or non-devotees, we're all craving to come back into that atmosphere of pure spirituality with Krishna. Just as a drop of water is always flowing back to the ocean. It's always flowing back to the ocean. It's evaporated from the ocean, it drops on the land, and it's always constantly going back. So we're all going back to Krishna. So how do we get there? The problem is we've been conditioned since time immemorial to the objects of the senses, this material world. This material world is the objects. This material consists of objects for our senses. And so we're living here. And we have to, we can't live here. You can't be in two places at once. You can't be in the material world, and sometimes people try to do two things at one time, and you can't. Can't be in the material world and spiritual world simultaneously. You can go back and forth. So we have to purify our senses. Like Krishna says, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust, which is kama, we call lust. It means the attraction to the material world. So as we progress to the mode of goodness, our attachment to the objects of the senses is diminished. And so the process of Krishna consciousness is to bring us into the mode of goodness. And when we get into the mode of goodness, then real knowledge develops. And real knowledge doesn't mean 1, 2, 3, ABC. It means to see the self as opposed to the body. It means to see the individual souls going through the process of transmigration. It means to see the temporariness of everything in this material world and the illusoriness of it. And then by chanting, putting ourselves in the mode of goodness and chanting, we associate with Krishna. And then he, within the heart, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam Adami buddhi yogam tvam yenamam upayantite. He reveals himself to us. It starts, the revelation begins in the heart and then proceeds to be a revelation of Krishna everywhere. And then it becomes Vasudeva Sarvamiti. There's nothing but Krishna. And so once he begins to reveal himself to us within the heart, which does, as I was saying, relationships are not developed in a second. It takes time. But over time, when he reveals himself within the heart, then we become very attracted to him. It's automatic. It doesn't have to be. The attraction is spontaneous, it's natural. And as we become attracted to him, the next stage becomes taste or ruchi. When we have a taste for associating with Krishna, our taste for associating with this material world falls away, commensurate, proportionately. As the light comes on, the darkness goes away. It happens together simultaneously. So that once Krishna reveals himself to us within the heart, then there's ruchi, a taste, because he is the most pleasurable. There's no pleasure in the material world that compares to the pleasure of being in the effulgence, the joy, the presence of Supreme Personality, the source of all happiness. he gives all the happiness that we receive in this material world. It's come from Krishna. Everything, every piece of happiness we've ever had comes from Krishna. The taste of a nice pakora. He's created all that. So he knows perfectly well how to give us unlimited happiness. So ruchi comes, then from ruchi, from taste, there comes attachment. So we become very attached to Krishna. And as we become attached to him, we become detached from this material world. And from the attachment comes deeper. When the attachment becomes deeper and deeper and deeper, it develops into a hankering for his association. And as the hankering becomes deeper and deeper, it becomes what in Sanskrit is called loyam, or just intense desire for him. And that then matures into prema. But it all begins here. It begins with chanting, following the regular principles, and serving Krishna as best we can. And once we do that sincerely, if we stick to that process, it's like if you get on the train, as soon as you get on the train, if you're going to train to New York, you're not going to be there the first minute you're on the train. But if you stay on that train, you may go to sleep tonight, you wake up the next morning, that train will take you to New York. If you stay on this train of Krishna consciousness, because this is not something that's been created in this material world. This is not Balabhadra or me or ISKCON, or it's coming from Prabhupada, who brought it from Lord Chaitanya. This is coming from the Supreme Lord himself. It's his train. When you get on this train, you stay on this train, you will get to that supreme destination of love of God. Then all the problems since time they're finished. No more suffering. Suffering is over. You don't have to have anything other than that. Once you have Krishna, even just the slight beginning of Krishna, you don't need anything else. Whatever this material world could offer is a piece of sand in comparison to Krishna. And you don't have to pay him. All you have to do is love him. And you'll love him by just accepting this process of Krishna consciousness. It's not a cheating process. It's not a cheating process. It works. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Hare.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Balvanta Prabhu, for those words of wisdom. I have a very quick, short question, Prabhu, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
How do we maintain our enthusiasm and faith in Krishna consciousness in the long run?
Well, I think we just have to, in my experience, we just have to continue sincerely, and Krishna will reciprocate with us. Even though we may not see him everywhere, he sees us. He sees everything. So if we start to become discouraged or despondent in any way, he knows how to encourage us. So we have to just keep our hearts set on spiritual life. We go through our material life. We have to do that. As long as we're in this material world, we have to perform our material duties. So we have to do that dutifully. And there's going to be ups and downs. There will always be ups and downs in this material world. Even Arjuna, Yudhisthira, so many, everyone goes through these. Prabhupada himself. So we will have those. But if we just ask Krishna for help, if we're just sincere, we chant sincerely, we do it dutifully, we chant our rounds every day, we don't follow regular principles, we'll have troubles. If we don't follow regular principles, that can become a disaster on the path of spiritual life. If somehow we break the regular principles, we just go on. We just like a child will stumble and fall sometimes. It's not like we should not become discouraged, but we should try not. We shouldn't break those regular principles, because if we do, you can be certain there will be a disturbance on the path. But if you sincerely follow regular principles and you sincerely chant and you pray to Krishna for help, he will help you. And then by his association, you'll keep enthusiasm. The enthusiasm for that, you have to serve. I mean, you have to, some of us, like myself, I'm working outside the temple, right? So I don't live in the temple, but I try to help the temple anyway, anytime that I can. And by helping the temple, that keeps me enthusiastic to do my work. But I see a purpose in it. And then gradually, as we become more advanced, we'll get that enthusiasm from the realization within our hearts. It's a long answer, sorry, but.
Well, that was very, very helpful, Balvanta Prabhu. You said that we should chant our at least 16 rounds nicely. We should very strictly, carefully follow the 4 regulative principles, and we should serve. These are
If you
exactly.
do that, I guarantee you'll be successful.
Thank you. Thank
Guaranteed.
you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Anybody else?
Anyone else has any final questions or comments?
Devotees are always modest. They don't want to speak out sometimes.
And Balvanta, I want to share one more instruction you gave us in the old days. You said that if you can just chant one round, completely focused, just one round out of 16, you should chant your 16, but if you can just chant one round completely, your day will be blissful.
That's true.
So we used to keep that in our heart when Sankirtan, chanting 16 rounds with total focus is so powerful. But if you do one round, but then another thing you told me one time, I was going through some emotional difficulties as a brahmachari, because I was brahmachari like 8 years, but then I was going through some transition in my heart and I was just in tears. And I came to you with my problem and you said to me, Balabhadra, don't you remember how much you love the Bhagavatam? Just go read the Bhagavatam. And that solved all my problems. It really did.
Yeah, you read Prabhupada's books. You just if you're having some trouble, you read those books, and you'll find the answer. I try to read Srimad Bhagavatam every morning, and Chaitanya Charitamrita every night.
Haribol.
Yeah, it's you're associating with Krishna on this Srimad Bhagavatam, and you're associating with Lord Chaitanya and the Chaitanya Charitamrita. These are transcendental literatures. Yeah. Thanks, Balabhadra.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Balvanta Prabhu, for sharing those.
Thank you.
And thank you, Balvanta Prabhu.
Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for being a devotee. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Dear devotees, please unmute yourself, all of you. Let us unmute. And His Grace, Balvanta Prabhu ki.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Chaitanya
Thank you.
Mahaprabhu ki jai.
Jai.
Balaram Srimati Radharani ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Right.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
All right. Haribo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Haribol. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much.
Praise to Prabhupada.